Welcome back. Today we're diving into what is arguably the single most fundamental question of human existence. How do we actually make sense of our incredibly complex universe? It's a massive topic, and today we're looking at two entirely different, yet completely essential frameworks for understanding reality. To get us started, think about the kinds of questions we ask every single day. Now, if I ask you a highly mechanical question, something like, why does rain fall from the sky? Or how does the human heart pump blood? You know exactly what kind of tools to use to find that answer. But what happens when you ask, what makes life worth living? Suddenly, measuring instruments aren't going to help you much, are they? So, let's unpack this dichotomy. Some questions demand precise measurement. We can observe the clouds, we can track the biology of a heart. But others, like the meaning of happiness or the value of family, those demand thoughtful interpretation. And this sets up the core duality of our whole explainer today, the mechanics of science versus the meaning of philosophy. Here is our roadmap. 1. Two ways of understanding reality. 2. The lens of science. 3. The mirror of philosophy. 4. Comparing how and why. And 5. The convergence of truth. Okay, let's jump right into part 1. Two ways of understanding reality. To truly understand reality, we need structure, right? A clear path of inquiry. First, we have to define the boundaries of scientific and philosophical truth. Next, we contrast their methods side by side. And finally, step 3, we synthesize the application, recognizing that we absolutely need both to fully understand the human experience. Which brings us to part 2, the lens of science. Now, what's really fascinating here is the strict, rigorous parameter this sets. Scientific truth isn't just a good guess, it's knowledge discovered exclusively through the scientific method. Its entire foundation relies on a highly structured system. We're talking observation, experimentation, precise measurement, tangible physical evidence, and strict verification. When you look under the hood at the architecture of this truth, you see a continuous, cyclical process. It begins by being empirical, based entirely on observable evidence. Then, it must be testable through structured experiments. Third, it has to be verifiable, meaning someone else can repeat your exact process and get the exact same result. And finally, it is subject to revision. It actively adapts and changes the very moment new physical evidence emerges. Let's bring this abstract framework down to earth. The lens in action deals with universally verifiable principles. For instance, thermodynamics dictates that water boils at exactly 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. Astrophysics maps how the Earth revolves around the sun. Physics measures gravity, and biology maps the heart. These are empirical realities. No matter what your personal beliefs happen to be, these truths can be universally tested and verified. Now let's flip the script. Part 3, the mirror of philosophy. This is where the definition shifts dramatically. Philosophical truth refers to truths discovered not in a laboratory surrounded by test tubes and beakers, but rather through reason, reflection, critical thinking, and rigorous analysis. It turns the inquiry inward, pursuing the discovery of meaning by examining values, our existence, and the fundamental nature of the human experience itself. The framework here, it's a totally different ballgame compared to science. It's driven by logical reasoning and structured argumentation rather than physical measurement. It demands deep, continuous reflection about complex experiences. It actively explores interpretive meanings, embracing different perspectives. And most importantly, it's fundamental. It examines the bedrock questions of existence that just simply cannot be answered through experimentation alone. So, what does this mirror actually look like in action? Well, consider questions like these. What is the meaning of life? What makes an action morally right? What is the true nature of justice? Do humans even possess free will? Think about it. You cannot put justice under a microscope. You can't measure free will with a thermometer. These abstract realities absolutely require reflection and reasoning. All right, moving on to part 4, comparing how and why. Let's play a little game and turn this into an active puzzle. See if you can diagnose whether these questions rely primarily on the lens of science or the mirror of philosophy. What causes volcanic eruptions? Science. What is the meaning of freedom? Philosophy. How does the human brain function? That's science. What makes an action morally right? Philosophy. It becomes incredibly clear that the tool you choose depends entirely on the question you ask. To really draw the line between these two, we can use a diagnostic matrix to see how their evolutions contrast.
The evolution of scientific truth changes immediately with new physical evidence. If an experiment proves a previous theory wrong, boom, science updates right then and there. But the evolution of philosophical truth is much different. It evolves slowly, generation by generation, through ongoing dialogue and debate.
Let's put this into ultimate perspective by looking at one single phenomenon, the human mind. Notice how both frameworks approach the exact same subject, but they take completely different paths. This dynamic is perfectly captured right here. Science asks the mechanical how. How do neurons fire to create consciousness? It relies on biological mapping and brain scans. Philosophy, on the other hand, asks the existential why. Do our conscious choices mean we actually have free will? It relies on ethics and logic. Science answers the how, and philosophy answers the why. And that leads us to our final section, Part 5, the convergence of truth. When you weave these two together, a really profound reality starts to emerge. Scientific truth explains how the universe works. Philosophical truth explores what the universe means. Yes, they are different, but they are deeply complementary ways of understanding reality. The core takeaway here is this: you cannot build a comprehensive worldview if you are missing half the pieces. To see why this actually matters in the real world, let's apply both frameworks to some of the highest stakes crises we face today. Take climate change. Science tells us exactly how much carbon is trapping heat, but philosophy steps in to ask what our moral obligation is to future unborn generations. Or global health. Science synthesizes vaccines for a novel virus, but philosophy asks how we distribute those vaccines justly when resources are scarce. Zooming in specifically on artificial intelligence, we see exactly why this matters so much. Science is relentlessly focused on building faster, more powerful AI neural networks. But without philosophy there to simultaneously ask what ethical guardrails are required to prevent AI from eroding human agency, well, technical innovation becomes incredibly dangerous. Technical capability absolutely must always be paired with moral obligation. So, to pull all these essential takeaways together from the source material, the domain of evidence dictates the mechanics of reality, the domain of reason dictates the meaning of reality, and the unified worldview demands that we do not choose between them. Science and philosophy permanently complement one another in our lifelong pursuit to fully understand human existence. Which leaves us with a final provocative question to chew on today. As you navigate the complexities of life, making decisions and forming opinions, ask yourself, are you applying both the lens and the mirror, or are you missing half the pieces to your worldview?